Water gardens are becoming more and more popular, and that's evident by some of the activities we've been involved with over the past few years. To begin with, many of our home video contest entries have had water gardens in their landscapes. And we've noticed also last year on our survey evaluation that we did with Oklahoma Gardening, one of the topics that was highly requested were more topics or segments on water gardening. Also, our extension offices and full-service garden centers are telling us they're getting more requests, not to mention some of the national distributors tell us that Oklahoma is one of the top-selling states on water gardening products. As a result, we decided to try our hand at water gardening so we could bring you some future segments here at Oklahoma Gardening. And joining us today is Mr. Jim Thompson of Wildwood Garden Center. Jim, welcome to Oklahoma Gardening.
Good to be here, Steve.
Now, Wildwood Garden Center, our good friends there in Tulsa, have assisted us in this endeavor by not only designing the project, which Jim was involved in, but also helping us in labor and donating some of the materials to the Oklahoma State Nurserymen's Association. And Jim, the thing that I've noticed is it really was much simpler than I thought it would be, except for digging. Why don't we tell the viewers a little bit about the process that we went through? And I think first of all, you may want to comment on site selection.
Okay. Site selection is important. We're trying to locate a water garden that's going to be close to the people. We want the people to interact with it. We'd also like to have some shade on it. Some morning sun would be good. We'd like to have some shade in the afternoon on it. Drainage is important because we don't want any surface water going into the water garden itself because we put chemicals on grass around it. We don't want those chemicals getting into the water garden.
What about near trees? A lot of times we want to, like, we've got ours next to trees. What kind of problems are we going to have? Anything?
We don't have a lot of problems with roots or anything. We're going to have some debris and some leaves that will fall in, but we can control that with netting and things like that during the fall months.
Okay. But you wouldn't want to get them too close to trees, I guess, because of the tree roots.
Right.
Okay. Now, what about a power source? I've noticed we've got a pretty elaborate system here. Comment on what we would need for a traditional water garden.
Well, water gardens require 110 volt electricity to run pumps. It's nice to have a dual outlet if you want to do landscape lighting around it also to enhance some night viewing. We need a fault limit sensor on that outlet just as a safety precaution.
Okay. Now, ours is really probably not a traditional water garden. It's pretty good size. Comment about maybe what most home gardeners would experiment with, and maybe a little bit on cost.
Okay. Size-wise, the average homeowner's probably doing like a 6 by 8 water garden, and ours is much larger than that. Cost-wise, you can get into water gardening for $200, $250.
Okay.
Liner, pump.
Various materials.
Yes.
Now also, Jim, earlier you commented that if someone is trying to save a little bit of money, that you can do it in several steps too. Is that right, by adding on to it?
That's correct. Just like this water garden here is actually two separate ponds that aren't really interacting with each other, but they appear to be. So we could go in and phase a small pond, and right next to it, drop in another pond right next.
Okay. When the dollars would allow that.
That's correct.
Okay. Now let's go ahead and talk about the digging process. And first of all, you had to mark the location after you designed it. Now, you drew this out on plans. Go ahead and comment and walk us through that step then.
Okay. Well, design-wise, we come up with an irregular shape. Best way to lay that out when you're ready to start digging is with a garden hose. Just lay the garden hose, take your measurements off your plan, and get that part of it right, and then start your digging and start removing that soil out of the center.
Okay, now, like I say, the digging would probably be the most maybe stressful part, although we cheated a little bit, and we had assistance from Ditch Witch over at Perry to help with a backhoe. But tell us about tools and materials as far as digging, what someone would look at.
Well, we'd be looking at, depending on your soil, a garden, a shovel, a pick, definitely a rake. We would need to, one thing that's critical in the digging process is the pond needs to be level. So you'd want a board that's going to be a good straight edge that would go across the longest dimensions of your pond, and a good carpenter's level to ensure that you've got a nice, even distribution of water.
Okay, and once the design and everything was dug out, you left a shelf area right around the edge for plants. What is the purpose of that?
Well, the shelf area, we have bog plants, and bog plants don't require deep water. We would want their roots covered with water and maybe 1 or 2 inches of water on their stems. So we design these with garden shelves in different places that would take care of bog plants. And bog plants can be things like iris that bloom, and these are neat plants also. Then your depth, we feel like 24 inches is a minimum in Oklahoma. Some of the books will say 16 or 18, but with our winters, I think 24 is a minimum. 30 inches is great.
Okay. Now, after it was dug out, you took extra time to make sure any sharp objects, rocks, stems, anything like that were out of there, but we didn't put sand in. Comment on that next step for us.
Well, we had good soil here. It was free of any rock or debris, so we were just able to level off here and lay our liner. If you lived in the soil that had a lot of rock, you'd want to definitely go in and put down some kind of buffer, 2 to 4 inches of sand. That means you're going to have to dig a little deeper to get a nice cushion for that liner to sit on.
Well, then the next step was putting in the liner. Comment on the different kinds of liners, because I know some people like to cut corners here and just use black plastic or pool liners, and there's really some concerns there, isn't there?
There is. Black plastic and pool liners, like swimming pool liners that people replace. These things have chemicals that are impregnated into the plastic that would harm some of the things we're trying to grow in a water garden. You'd want to find a fish-safe, non-toxic material for your liner. We have PVC liners available, and rubber liners available, and even rigid liners for those people that want the shape already designed for them.
So after we have the hole dug and we're ready to put the liner in, walk us through that step, because that's the key to it, I guess, and making sure it's successful and we don't puncture it. Any safety precautions there?
Well, you need to take your shoes off. Basically, you'll lay the liner flat across the hole. It's good sometimes to set a couple of stones on those corners. You start the water filling up, it starts to conform to any shape you want it to, and you fold any kind of overlapping liner out of its way and make the creases as small and unnoticeable as possible.
Now, you add a little bit of width on the liner to compensate for the depth of the pool too, is that right?
That's
when
right.
Measuring the size out?
Yeah, if you figure an 8 by 10 liner, you're going to need a 14 by 16 foot liner to cover that hole, because you're losing 4 feet, 2 feet on either side, and then you have to come out and overlay, and to have a place to put your stone.
Now, you had a little trick in that overlay with the excess too. What did we actually cover it up, and what was the purpose in that?
Well, we found that you're better off to take that liner over and bury the edge of that liner back into the soil, so you don't get any groundwater running under your liner and causing water to be under that liner and bubbling it back up.
Well, then the next step obviously was filling with water. And comment, Jim, on the difference between like fountains and waterfalls, which we've chose to use here.
Well, we feel like these types of waterfalls work better in a water garden. You have a lot of debris in the water garden itself. Plants put off little particles, and these hoses are 3/8 half-inch hoses, so they're not going to be obstructed. When we deal with a water feature or a spray, you're looking at pinhole size heads, and they clog up so quickly that they just don't really
and they
work
can
well.
be a little bit more costly, I assume, too.
They're very expensive.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, a big part, maybe the heartbeat of the pool, is the filter system and the pump. Tell us about what we have here and what people really need to incorporate in such a system?
Well, on a pump, you're trying to displace about half the amount of water you have per hour. If you have 1,000 gallons of water in your water garden, then you'll want a pump that will pump 500 gallons per hour. And we've set this system up with 2 biofoam filters, and these filters are open foam filters that bacteria will build up on and help decompose plant pieces and other particles that come in contact with the pond. They're very simple systems. You need to go in once a week or once every 2 weeks and rinse the foam out, back flush it, and reinstall.
And a filter is very important, and the pump, I guess, is just a submergible pump, but again, you don't want to take shortcuts. You want a water garden pump, is that right?
That's correct. Since we've been into this for the last 4 years, we've seen a lot of manufacturers start to develop pumps that do not have oil in them. They're sealed pumps that don't corrode and decompose, so they're real non-toxic, I guess, to the water garden.
Okay, and then we use just regular water hose that we had left over to funnel the water up through the falls, but you said there's also optional uses there too.
Well, there are, of course, this water garden hose will hold up real well, and it will build an algae up on it, so it will be less noticeable than it is now. But there are products on the market that are black, poly plastic hoses that are less noticeable.
Okay. Well, lastly, I guess, Jim, I'd have you tell us about what we used around the edge of our border and some of the options there.
Sure. What we've used here is just native sandstone that we've selected in the Stillwater area. We've brought them in from the wild, and we've basically just set them on the edges. We did not mortar these in. That's an option to the homeowner to mortar these in and make it a more permanent situation. But if there's maintenance to be done on the garden pond, it's nice to be able to, if you had to pull a liner or you wanted to add on to the liner or something like that, we could just pull these out of the way and then put them back in.
Well, Jim, we've had a lot of positive comments already on the garden, even though we're not quite finished, and we really appreciate Wildwood's involvement and hope that you'll stick around over the next few weeks, because we'll be talking to you more in depth about plant material, also some of the fish that you can use, and give you a few pointers on winterizing the water garden coming up for the winter months. So Jim, thanks again.
Well, thank you.